Bronze walls flare under a dying sun, while channels wide as avenues pull the sea straight into the heart of a city that should not exist. Priests move between pillars skinned in gold. Scribes carve the names of kings whose reigns stretch so far back they feel less like history and more like gravity itself. Something always there, pressing down on memory. Across another landscape, between two restless rivers, clay tablets whisper of a time when rule did not rise from tribes or armies, but dropped from the sky like a crown placed by unseen hands. Two traditions, oceans apart, both remember an age before the waters rose, when beings closer to gods than men shaped cities, laws, and the fragile experiment of civilization. The question is no longer whether these memories are myth, but whether myth is the last shadow cast by a forgotten reality. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And, as always, with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. Salt wind moves across open water where the Mediterranean narrows toward the strait the Greeks once called the Pillars of Heracles, stone sentinels marking the edge of the known world. Beyond that gateway, sailors imagined a wider ocean, darker, heavier, a body of water that did not forgive mistakes. In that direction, memory places an island described not as a rumor but with the confidence of a surveyor, measured in stadia, a Greek unit roughly the length of 2 football fields laid end to end, its harbours cut with angles so precise they feel engineered rather than dreamed. The story insists on weight and distance, on canals broad enough for warships, with 3 banks of oars, triremes, to pass side by side, their bronze rams flashing at the surface like the teeth of a predator. The capital rises in rings, land and water, alternating like ripples frozen in stone. Concentric circles, a term that simply means sharing one centre, spread outward from a hill where a god once loved a mortal woman. Around that hill, trenches were carved and flooded, creating moats before the word moat existed, barriers of water that turned geography into defense. The outer walls gleam with metals named as if taken from an inventory, bronze, tin, and a reddish substance called Orichalcum, described as shining like fire. Whether it was a copper alloy similar to brass or a lost mixture, no one now can reproduce matters less than the detail itself. This is not how vague legends speak. This is how administrators record construction materials. At the center stands a temple plated in silver and gold, surfaces reflecting light so fiercely the structure must have seemed to burn at sunrise. Inside, a statue of the sea god towers over worshippers, reins in hand, 6 winged horses rearing, their hooves never touching ground. Ivory, taken from elephant tusks, lines the ceiling, its pale surface inlaid with metals, a ceiling that would glow softly in lamplight like moonlight trapped indoors. Offerings accumulate, statues, bowls, weapons, small votive figures left by citizens seeking favor. The city breathes through trade, ships arrive heavy with grain, timber, stone, animals, docks carved directly into bedrock hold them in place. Noise never stops, hulls knocking, ropes straining, merchants shouting in dialect that scrape against each other like mismatched stones. Power here does not belong to one ruler alone, but to 10 lineages, each tracing descent to the same divine ancestor. Kingship rotates in emphasis but not in unity, bound by laws carved onto a pillar of orichalcum set in the temple. The pillar is not symbolic decoration, it is a contract in metal. Every few years the rulers gather, hunt a bull without iron weapons, bind it, sacrifice it, and let its blood run across the engraved laws before they judge disputes. Blood-touching text makes law a living thing, not an abstraction. They swear not to wage war on one another, not to execute a relative without the consent of most of the 10. It is a federation before the concept has a name, a balance between autonomy and shared order. Fields stretch beyond the city in a vast rectangular plain, measured again with almost obsessive care. Channels grid the land, straight lines cut to carry mountain water across soil, turning floodplain into planned agriculture. 2 harvests a year rise from the system, one fed by rain, the other by irrigation, which simply means guiding water where it would not naturally go. Timber from surrounding highlands floats down canals to workshops. Stone arrives the same way. The army drawn from this landscape is counted parcel by parcel: chariots, horses, infantry, archers, sailors. Numbers swell into the hundreds of thousands, figures so large they strain belief, yet presented with the calm tone of a ledger. Across the sea, and centuries away, clay tablets from southern Mesopotamia describe another beginning. Wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus formed the script modern scholars call cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge. These tablets list kings from cities like Eridu, a settlement rising from marshland near the Persian Gulf. The text opens with a phrase that feels less political than cosmic: kingship descended from heaven. Rule is not invented, it is delivered. The earliest rulers reign for spans that read like geological eras, tens of thousands of years, numbers built from a base 60 counting system, the same logic that divides hours into 60 minutes today. Whether these figures encode symbolism, dynasties compressed into single names, or mythic exaggeration, the pattern is clear. There was an age before a flood, an age of beings closer to the divine, followed by water that erased almost everything. 2 records, one etched in Greek dialogue, the other in Sumerian king lists, both circle the same idea. Civilization began not in slow trial and error, but in a sudden blaze of order, law, architecture, and hierarchy, later broken by catastrophe. The island beyond the strait and the city between rivers stand like mirrors angled toward each other across time. In both reflections, humanity is not at the center, but at the receiving end of something greater, as if culture itself were an inheritance from a height we no longer remember how to climb back to. Stone remembers pressure the way skin remembers scars. Beneath modern streets, beneath layers of newer ruins, foundations hold the shape of intention set down by hands long turned to dust. When archaeologists speak of stratigraphy, they mean the reading of Earth in layers, like pages in a book where deeper means older. In some places, those pages run so far back that the first cities appear not as hesitant experiments but as fully formed statements. Walls aligned to horizons, drainage systems guiding wastewater away from homes, storage rooms sized for surplus, not survival. Civilization, in these depths, looks less like a spark and more like an inheritance. In the southern marshes of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates split into channels before meeting the sea, settlements rose on artificial platforms to escape seasonal floods. Mud brick, simply clay mixed with straw and dried in the sun, form the bones of temples and houses. Over time, these platforms grew into tells, mounds built from the debris of successive occupations. Eridu, remembered in later texts as the first city of kingship, began as a modest shrine but evolved through repeated rebuilding into a sacred complex. Each phase sits atop the last, like a stack of memories pressed into earth. The earliest temple layers are small, almost humble, yet they already show orientation, symmetry, ritual space. The idea of ordered sacred architecture appears there at the dawn of urban life, not as a clumsy attempt, but as a clear template. Writing emerges in this environment not to tell stories, but to count. Tokens representing sheep, grain, oil become marks on clay tablets. Accounting precedes epic. The act of measuring harvests, tracking labor, and recording offerings creates a mental world where abstraction becomes possible. Once numbers stand for things, names can stand for people, and signs can carry speech across time. The Sumerian king list, with its long lines of rulers before the flood, is a product of that same impulse to order reality through inscription. Whether the early reign lengths are literal or symbolic, they frame history as a continuum stretching back into a different quality of time, one in which humans and gods share closer ground. Across the Mediterranean, another tradition preserves a memory of technical mastery that seems to outpace its supposed age. The island capital with concentric canals implies advanced hydraulic engineering. Digging channels through rock, lining them, controlling flow, preventing silt from clogging passages, these tasks demand planning, labor organization, and knowledge of materials. Hydraulics, the management of water in motion, becomes a signature of complex societies. In Mesopotamia, irrigation canals turned arid plains into grain fields. In the island account, water becomes defense, transport, and ornament at once. Different geographies, same language of control over rivers and seas. Both settings sit at environmental thresholds. River deltas and coastal plains are fertile but unstable. A slight rise in sea level can push salt water into fields, killing crops. A shift in river course can abandon a city or drown it. Around the end of the last ice age, global temperatures climbed, glaciers melted, and sea levels rose more than 100 meters over several millennia. Shorelines we know today lay far inland then. Broad coastal shelves, now underwater, were once habitable land. When geologists speak of meltwater pulses, they refer to periods when sea level rose rapidly, sometimes meters in a century. For communities living on low plains, that would not feel like gradual change, but like the sea advancing year by year, swallowing familiar ground. Memories of such transformations could harden into narratives of sudden destruction. A city lost to encroaching water might be remembered as sinking in a single night, even if the process took generations. Oral tradition compresses time, smoothing long decline into dramatic climax. Yet compression does not mean invention, it means experience translated into story. In both the island and the river traditions, water is the agent of reset, erasing structures, populations, and records, leaving survivors to rebuild with fragments of knowledge. Social organization in these accounts also shares structure. The island's 10 kings bound by law resemble a council model, power distributed among related elites. In early Mesopotamia, city-states each had their own ruler, often titled Ensi or Lugal, terms that can mean governor or king. Alliances and rivalries linked them in shifting networks. Authority was justified through divine favor. Temples stood at political centers, not separate from governance. Religion and administration interlocked, just as the pillar of law in the island temple fuses ritual and rule. Material culture reinforces the parallel. Metals signify status and reach. Tin, rare in many regions, must be traded across long distances to make bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Its presence indicates trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. Gold and silver, valued for luster and resistance to corrosion, accumulate in sacred contexts. Ivory signals contact with regions where elephants lived, either Africa or parts of Asia. These materials do not gather in isolation, they map connections. A society able to clad walls in metal or ceilings in ivory sites at the hub of exchange routes, yet both traditions insist on decline. In the island story, divine blood dilutes over generations until moral failure invites punishment. In Mesopotamian myth, humans multiply, noise angers gods, and a flood resets balance. These are moral frames placed over environmental or political realities. When systems grow complex, they also grow fragile. Trade can falter, soils can salinize from over-irrigation, leading to crop failure, populations constrain resources. Collapse follows, remembered as divine judgment or cosmic cycle. The recurring image is of a high point lost, a baseline lowered. Later societies look back and see themselves as diminished heirs. This backward gaze shapes identity. It motivates preservation of texts, rebuilding of temples on ancient foundations, and the telling of stories where knowledge once flowed more directly from a higher source. Whether that source is a god, a sky-descended kingship, or a culture now submerged beneath the sea, the effect is the same. Civilization is not self-born, it is received, partially forgotten, and sought again in stone, clay, and memory. Voices carry farther than stone. A wall collapses, a temple burns, but a sentence learned at a parent's knee can cross centuries without leaving a physical trace. Before ink and stylus, memory moved in breath, shaped by rhythm and repetition, so it would not slip. When scholars use the phrase oral tradition, they mean this disciplined transmission of story, law, and ancestry through speech, often set in patterns that help recall, like refrains in a song. Such traditions can hold astonishing detail, yet they also reshape events, compressing decades into moments, turning gradual change into single nights of fire or water. In river valleys where floods redraw boundaries, families might point to distant reeds and say a grandfather's house once stood there. Over generations, the line between personal recollection and communal myth blurs. The flood becomes not a season, but the flood, a dividing line in time. Mesopotamian texts preserve this structure with clarity. Kings before the waters, kings after. The earlier reigns stretch into immense spans, measured in units built on 60, the base of their counting system. 60 is not arbitrary. It divides cleanly by many numbers, making it practical for trade and astronomy. When reign lengths appear as multiples of 3,600, a unit called a sar, they signal not random exaggeration, but patterned thinking, memory shaped by numerical symmetry. Across the sea, the island narrative also comes through a chain of voices. A lawgiver hears priests in a delta city. A grandson hears the lawgiver. A philosopher writes the grandson's account. Each link claims continuity. Egyptian priests, portrayed as guardians of archives, stand for written preservation. Greece, at that time, leaned heavily on spoken heritage. The meeting of these two models, inscribed record and living speech, gives the story a double anchor. It is both heard and stored, as if the teller wants to ensure it cannot be dismissed as a mere fable. Ritual helps fix memory. In the island account, kings gather, sacrifice a bull, and swear over engraved laws. Repetition of this ceremony at set intervals would imprint the founding narrative onto each generation of rulers. In Mesopotamia, New Year festivals reenacted cosmic myths, reciting how order emerged from chaos. When a community retells origins within ritual, it does more than remember. It renews the story as present truth. The past is not distant, but cyclical, returning in performance. Language itself leaves clues. Terms like kingship, descended from heaven, express worldview through metaphor that may have once felt literal. Sky stands for the divine realm, a vertical axis of authority. In the island tradition, descent from a sea god blends vertical and horizontal imagery, power from above embodied in a lineage rooted in a specific landscape. Both expressions collapse cosmic scale into political legitimacy. Rule is justified not by conquest alone, but by connection to forces beyond ordinary humanity. Transmission across cultures complicates the picture. Trade routes link regions long before empires formalize contact. Amber moves from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Lapis lazuli travels from Afghanistan to Mesopotamia. Along with goods, travel tales. Sailors share port legends, merchants exchange rumors of distant marvels. Over centuries, motifs migrate: a flood hero, a lost land, a divine law code. When similar stories appear in different tongues, they may reflect shared experience, borrowing, or parallel invention shaped by comparable environments. The presence of writing in one region and its absence in another does not block exchange. Stories cross borders more easily than scripts. Compression of time in oral memory does not erase structure. Genealogies often bridge gaps, naming ancestors in sequence even when precise dates fade. A lineage of 10 kings in the island account mirrors a structured list, like the 8 antediluvian rulers of Mesopotamia. Such numbers may carry symbolic weight, 10 suggesting completeness, 8 echoing cycles tied to lunar phases, yet they also provide scaffolding for recall. A storyteller can hold a sequence of names anchored to a sacred number. Modern psychology notes that memory is reconstructive. Each retelling blends recall with present context. Yet collective memory, reinforced by group consensus, resists drastic change. When an entire community knows the outline of a narrative, deviations are corrected. Over time, embellishments enter, but the core remains recognizable. A city of rings, a flood dividing eras, rule from the sky. These elements persist because they answer deep questions. Where did order come from, and why does the world now feel diminished compared to an imagined beginning? Material remnants sometimes validate fragments of story. Discoveries of submerged settlements on continental shelves show that shorelines once lay farther out. Stone tools and hearths found underwater confirm that people lived on lands now drowned. Such findings do not prove any specific legend, but they demonstrate that human memory of lost coasts could be rooted in real displacement. A tale of an island swallowed might encode generational witness to rising seas, filtered through mythic language. The act of writing transforms fluid narrative into fixed text, yet even then scribes copy, gloss, and adapt. A clay tablet breaks, a new one is made from memory. A manuscript wears, a monk recopies it centuries later. Variants emerge, like branches of a tree sharing a trunk, What survives is not a pristine original, but a lineage of versions. Still, the persistence of a narrative across such transmission suggests durability beyond mere entertainment. It serves identity, moral instruction, and explanation of the world's state. Listening to these layered voices requires holding two truths at once. Stories reshape reality, and reality shapes stories. The boundary is porous. A flood could be both hydrological event and divine judgment in memory. A political federation can become a sacred lineage in retelling. When separate traditions, shaped by different languages and landscapes, converge on similar structures of a lost age, the convergence itself becomes data. It points not to a single, simple source, but to a shared human effort to remember origins that feel just out of reach, as if the first chapter of history lies partly erased, leaving only echoes carried on breath. Water does not need intention to become an enemy. It follows gravity, fills low ground, slips through cracks, and when its volume increases beyond what land can hold, it rearranges maps. Coastlines are agreements between rock and sea, and like all agreements, they can be broken. At the end of the last ice age, vast sheets of ice that had locked up ocean water began to melt. As they thinned, oceans swelled. This was not a single wave, but a long surge punctuated by pulses, periods when sea level rose faster than usual. To people living on continental shelves, broad, gently sloping regions now underwater, this would have looked like a slow invasion that never retreated. Imagine a fishing village built near a rich estuary. Each generation notices the tide reaching a little farther inland. Wells turn brackish as salt water seeps into freshwater layers. Fields that once grew grain produce less as salinity builds in the soil. Houses are rebuilt slightly higher, then again. Graves of ancestors disappear under marsh. Over decades, families move, telling children that their old home lies beneath the waves. Compress that process into story, and the sea takes a city in a night. Geologists read this history in sediment cores, long cylinders of mud pulled from the ocean floor. Layers of sand, silt, and microscopic shells stack like annual rings in a tree, each band reflecting conditions at the time of deposition. A sudden influx of coarse material can signal a powerful storm or tsunami. Fine layers rich in marine organisms where freshwater species once lived indicate rising seas. Radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of carbon isotopes in once living matter, anchors these layers to timelines measured in thousands of years. Around 9,600 BCE, one such period of rapid climate transition marks the boundary between colder and warmer conditions in the Northern Hemisphere. River systems respond dramatically to these shifts. When glaciers melt upstream, rivers swell, carry more sediment, and can change course. In low-gradient deltas, where slope is minimal, a small change in water level can flood vast areas. Mesopotamia's plains were built by sediment dropped by rivers over millennia. Cities there relied on levees and canals to manage flow. A breach during extreme flooding could submerge settlements, leaving only mud and debris. Repeated events would ingrain respect and fear for water's power. Coastal civilizations face additional hazards. Underwater landslides can generate tsunamis, long waves that travel fast in deep water and rise dramatically near shore. Unlike wind-driven waves, tsunamis carry the mass of the ocean in motion. When they hit, water can surge kilometers inland, then retreat, dragging structures and people back out. Evidence of ancient tsunamis appears as marine sand layers found inland, sometimes mixed with shells and broken artifacts. Such deposits mark sudden marine incursions distinct from gradual sea level rise. The island account describes a civilization lost in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. Earthquakes point to tectonic activity, movement along faults where Earth's crust shifts. Subduction zones, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, generate some of the most powerful quakes and tsunamis. The Mediterranean and adjacent Atlantic margins sit near complex plate boundaries. Volcanic islands can also collapse when internal structures weaken, causing flanks to slide into the sea. This process displaces huge volumes of water, potentially producing destructive waves. Even without dramatic events, the psychological impact of environmental instability shapes culture. Societies develop flood myths not as fantasy, but as frameworks to understand recurring trauma. A myth organizes fear, assigns agency, and offers moral interpretation. It tells people why disaster happened and how to live to avoid repeating it. In Mesopotamian narratives, divine displeasure triggers flood, but a wise figure preserves life by building a vessel. The lesson includes obedience, foresight, and respect for higher powers. Engineering evolves in response. Levees, canals, and raised platforms are practical answers to water threat. The island's concentric moats might reflect a culture deeply aware of water management, turning a hazard into defense. Mesopotamian cities built ziggurats, stepped temple towers elevating sacred space above flood level. Height becomes safety and proximity to the divine. Architecture encodes environmental knowledge. Modern bathymetric maps which chart underwater topography reveal submerged river channels and former coastlines on continental shelves. These drowned landscapes show that habitable land once extended farther into what is now open sea. Human groups living there would have left tools, camps, and possibly larger structures, now buried under sediment. Discovering such sites is difficult, but not impossible. Underwater archaeology uses sonar and remotely operated vehicles to detect anomalies on the sea floor. Each find reminds us that present coastlines are snapshots, not constants. Climate shifts also alter rainfall patterns. Regions that were once green can become arid, forcing migrations. When people move, they carry memories of former homes, reshaping identity around loss. A narrative of a golden age in a fertile land, now gone, serves both as explanation and as anchor. It says, "We came from somewhere better, and our displacement has meaning." Science describes mechanisms, story describes experience. They operate in different languages but can refer to the same events. A meltwater pulse becomes a world flood. A tectonic collapse becomes divine punishment. Over time, the physical cause fades, the moral frame remains. Yet the persistence of water as the agent of reset across cultures suggests a shared vulnerability. Early civilizations clustered where water brought fertility, and those same locations made them susceptible to sudden change. The tension between benefit and risk defines human settlement. Rivers nourish and destroy, seas feed and drown. Learning to read their rhythms is survival. Forgetting invites catastrophe. The ancient narratives preserve this lesson with emotional force. They do not speak in millimeters per year or isotope ratios, but in nights of terror and cities lost. Beneath the imagery lies observation, sharpened by necessity. The ground can shake, the sea can rise, and what seems permanent can vanish. Knowledge of that truth, passed through generations, becomes as much a foundation of civilization as stone or brick. Power leaves marks long after banners rot. The layout of a city, the width of its roads, the position of its temples, all speak a language of authority. Urban planning is not neutral, it encodes hierarchy. In the island capital, circles control movement. To reach the center, one must cross bridges, pass gates, move through layers of space that grow more restricted. Concentric design creates psychological distance as much as physical. Each ring signals rank. Outer districts bustle with trade and noise. Inner zones quiet under ritual gravity. The geometry itself becomes governance. Mesopotamian cities reveal similar intention, though expressed in different shapes. Streets wind, but sacred precincts stand elevated and bounded. A temple complex often dominates the urban core, not just as a religious site, but as an administrative hub. Priests oversee land, labor, and storage. Clay tablets recording barley rations or textile output come from temple archives. Sacred and secular blur. When scholars describe a theocratic economy, they mean a system where divine institutions manage material life. Authority flows from the gods through their earthly houses. In the island narrative, law lives on a metal pillar in the temple, washed in sacrificial blood before judgment. In Mesopotamia, law codes are carved into stone stelae, tall slabs placed in public view. The Code of Hammurabi, centuries later, shows a king receiving authority from a sun god, rays on the god's shoulders like beams of light. The relief above the text frames law as divine gift, not human invention. Punishments and rights are spelled out with precision. If a builder's house collapses and kills the owner, the builder is executed. Justice is concrete, tied to consequence. Both cultures link political unity to shared ritual. Periodic gatherings of rulers in the island account resemble councils known from early federations. Decisions about war, alliances, and disputes require collective consent. In Mesopotamia, city-states sometimes formed leagues, especially against external threats. Diplomacy appears in letters pressed into clay, sealed with cylinder seals, small carved stones rolled across wet clay to leave an image. A seal impression acts like a signature, proof of identity in a world without ink. Military organization reflects social structure. The island plain, divided into parcels that each supply soldiers, suggests a system of land tenure tied to service. Landholders owe the state manpower. In Mesopotamia, similar obligations existed. Farmers could be called to corvée labor, forced work on canals or walls, or to military duty. A chariot, a two-wheeled vehicle drawn by equids, requires metal fittings, trained animals, and skilled drivers. Its presence indicates wealth and specialization. Counting chariots in the thousands implies a logistical network sustaining fodder, craftsmen, and roads. Trade knits regions together. Ports in the island capital receive goods from afar. Mesopotamian texts mention merchants traveling by river and sea, exchanging grain, wool, and crafted items for timber, stone, and metals scarce in the alluvial plains. A cylinder seal might show a boat with high prow, cargo stacked midship. Trade routes carry not only objects but techniques, metallurgy, shipbuilding, accounting practices. Standard weights, small stones, shaped to agreed measures, ensure fairness in exchange. Uniform systems signal trust across distance. Architecture demonstrates both aspiration and control. Monumental building projects require labor coordination. Workers must be fed, housed, and supervised. Surplus agriculture makes this possible. Grain stored in large silos acts as both food and currency. Redistribution systems, where central authorities collect produce and reallocate it, reinforce loyalty. In the island story, abundance flows from fertile land and irrigation. In Mesopotamia, canal maintenance is life itself. A neglected canal silts up, fields dry, famine follows. Religion legitimizes these structures, offerings sustain gods who in turn sustain order. Temples own fields, herds, workshops. Priests interpret omens, reading liver patterns from sacrificed animals or movements of stars. Divination guides decisions, merging cosmology with policy. In the island narrative, ritual oaths before law ensure rulers see themselves as accountable to more than ambition. Breaking law is not just crime, but sacrilege. Social layers solidify under such systems. Elites dwell near sacred centers, laborers on margins. Yet dependence is mutual. A king without farmers starves. Farmers without defense fall to raiders. This interdependence shapes ideology. Texts praise harmony, depict rulers as shepherds of people, a metaphor linking governance to care of flocks. Shepherd imagery appears in Mesopotamian hymns and later in other traditions. The ruler guides, protects, disciplines. Collapse tests these arrangements. When trade falters or harvests fail, redistribution weakens. Elites lose capacity to command. In narratives, moral decay often precedes disaster, a narrative device linking social failure to cosmic consequence. But material causes lurk beneath. Soil salinization, the buildup of salts from irrigation in hot climates, reduces crop yields. Records show shifts from wheat to more salt-tolerant barley in Mesopotamia, evidence of environmental strain. Urban systems can overreach, dependent on delicate balances. The memory of a just, ordered beginning contrasts with a chaotic present. Stories of early federations governed by law, of rulers who valued virtue over wealth, serve as critiques of contemporary corruption. They project ideals backward, yet they also preserve structural knowledge, councils, codified law, integrated economies. Whether the island polity existed as described or not, the model reflects real governance possibilities known in the ancient world. In both traditions, authority is spatialized. To approach the sacred center is to move through power's layers. The city itself becomes a diagram of society, outer rings feeding inner sanctums radiating legitimacy outward. Stone and water, clay and metal, all arranged to make hierarchy visible. Long after individual names fade, these patterns endure in ruins and texts, reminding later generations that order is built, maintained, and always vulnerable to forces, natural or human, that can undo the careful geometry of rule. Metal changes the way a society thinks about possibility. Stone can be shaped, wood can be carved, but metal can be melted, poured, reforged. It flows before it hardens, like water that remembers the mold it filled. The mastery of metallurgy, the extraction and working of metals from ore, marks a threshold between simple tool-making and large-scale technological culture. In the island account, walls shine with bronze and orichalcum, a material described as second only to gold in value, glowing red like embers. In Mesopotamia, copper tools appear early, then bronze, an alloy that is harder and more durable. Smelting ore requires controlled heat, furnaces, fuel, airflow. It is chemistry before chemistry has a name. Mining extends a civilization's reach beyond its immediate environment. Copper might lie in one region, tin in another. To combine them, trade networks must stretch across mountains and seas. Each ingot carries geography with it. A metal object in a temple is a map in disguise, proof of connection. When walls are clad in metal, It signals not only wealth, but the ability to command distant resources. That ability depends on organization, trust, and shared standards. Craft specialization grows from this foundation. A smith cannot also farm full-time. Someone must feed him. Division of labor creates interdependence. In Mesopotamian cities, tablets list professions: metal workers, potters, weavers, scribes. Each role fits into a larger machine. In the island narrative, shipyards, docks, and arsenals imply similar specialization. A trireme with 3 tiers of oars demands precise carpentry, rope-making, sail-weaving, metal fittings. Naval power reflects industrial capacity. Knowledge accumulates in techniques passed from master to apprentice. There are no printed manuals, but there is embodied memory. The angle of a hammer strike, the color of heated metal, the sound of a furnace draft, all cues learned through repetition. Such tacit knowledge can persist through upheaval if craftsmen survive, or vanish if they do not. After collapse, later cultures sometimes struggle to replicate earlier feats, giving rise to legends of lost arts. Measurement underpins complex building. Standard units allow stones to fit, beams to align. In Mesopotamia, cubits based on the forearm's length and other measures guide construction. Weights made of stone or metal ensure fair trade. In the island capital, dimensions of canals and rings are given with precision, suggesting a surveying culture. Surveying, the art of measuring land, uses cords, rods, and sighting tools to map space. It turns landscape into numbers. Astronomy intersects with measurement. Observing the sky provides calendars. Agricultural societies track solstices and equinoxes, points when the sun reaches its highest or lowest path or crosses the celestial equator. These events signal planting and harvest times. Mesopotamian astronomer priests record star movements on tablets, correlating celestial cycles with earthly events. Aligning temples to cardinal directions or celestial bodies embeds cosmic order into architecture. A city aligned with the heavens claims harmony with the universe. Writing evolves from accounting to literature, law, and myth. Cuneiform signs multiply from simple tallies to complex syllables. Literacy remains limited to trained scribes, but their work shapes administration and culture. Contracts, hymns, medical texts, and omen lists survive on clay. Each tablet is both fragile and durable, fragile when wet, durable when fired or accidentally baked in conflagration. Archives form curated collections of knowledge. In the island narrative, written law on a metal pillar suggests permanence. Metal resists decay better than wood or clay. Inscribing law in such material makes it seem unchangeable, a physical anchor for moral order. The ritual of washing the inscription in blood before judgment reinforces its sacred status. Law is not merely policy, it is covenant. Transportation technology extends influence. Rivers are highways in Mesopotamia, boats carrying goods and people. The island's canals mirror this, turning water into infrastructure. Roads also matter. Packed earth, gravel, or stone paving improve movement of carts and animals. Distance shrinks when travel becomes reliable. Ideas and styles move with merchants and envoys. Timekeeping refines coordination, dividing the day, tracking months by lunar cycles, adjusting calendars to solar years, all require observation and record. The base 60 system used in Mesopotamia leaves its mark on modern clocks. Such systems arise from practical needs but shape perception. Time becomes quantifiable, a resource to allocate. Technological sophistication does not eliminate vulnerability. Complex systems depend on supply chains. If trade routes break, metal becomes scarce. If forests are overcut for fuel, furnaces go cold. Environmental limits intersect with social ones. The very networks that enable brilliance can propagate failure. Stories of lost civilizations often focus on their marvels, gleaming walls, vast fleets, precise laws. These elements inspire awe, but also carry warning. Mastery of material does not guarantee moral or ecological balance. The island's decline begins with a shift in character, divine lineage diluted, greed rising. Mesopotamian myths link human noise or excess to divine decision to send flood. Behind moral framing may lie recognition that growth has consequences, yet the persistence of technical knowledge across millennia shows resilience. Even after upheavals, later societies rebuild with inherited tools and concepts. The memory of how to smelt, measure, write and navigate rarely vanishes entirely. It may contract, localize, then expand again. Each cycle leaves traces, layers of innovation and loss. Metal, clay and stone thus become carriers of continuity. They hold the imprint of hands that solved problems in their own time. When later generations uncover these artifacts, they see both difference and kinship. The past appears advanced in some ways, simple in others, but always human in its drive to shape the world. In the glow of a furnace or the alignment of a wall, one can glimpse the same impulse that built cities of rings or temples by rivers, to impose order on matter, to make the environment answer intention, and to trust that knowledge once forged will outlast those who first mastered its fire. Faith is architecture built inside the mind before it ever becomes stone. A temple's walls are only the visible edge of a structure made of belief, fear, gratitude, and the need to locate human life within a larger order. In both the island civilization and the cities of the southern rivers, religion does not sit apart from daily existence. It saturates it. To understand these worlds, one must see that the divine is not distant. It is infrastructural, like roads or canals, shaping how power flows and how meaning is assigned. The sea god at the center of the island capital is not simply a figure of worship, but an ancestor, the origin point of kingship. Divine descent provides legitimacy more durable than force. If a ruler's authority comes from blood linked to a god, rebellion becomes not only political, but sacrilegious. In Mesopotamia, kings rarely claim to be gods themselves, but they are chosen by gods, shepherds appointed to manage the human flock. The distinction is subtle yet powerful. It keeps the divine realm slightly above, but still intimately involved in governance. Temples function as bridges between realms. Their elevated platforms or enclosed sacred precincts create thresholds, physical transitions marking entry into charged space. Crossing a gate, removing shoes, offering incense, these acts shift awareness. Ritual behavior encodes cosmology. When smoke rises from an altar, it mirrors prayers rising to the sky. When water is poured, it echoes the life-giving floods of rivers. Symbol and action intertwine. Sacrifice plays a central role. In the island narrative, the rulers hunt a bull without iron, using primitive tools, as if reenacting an older age. Blood spilled over law fuses life force with text. In Mesopotamia, animal sacrifice feeds gods through smoke and scent. Priests examine livers for omens, reading surface patterns as messages. Divination, the attempt to gain knowledge of the future or hidden present through signs, reflects a worldview where the cosmos is communicative. Nothing happens without meaning. Myth provides narrative frameworks for existence. Creation stories describe how order emerged from chaos. In Babylonian tradition, a storm god defeats a sea dragon, splitting her body to form sky and earth. Chaos becomes structure. Such imagery resonates with societies that wrest order from floods and mud each year. The island account also begins with shaping water, turning natural landscape into patterned rings. Human engineering echoes divine acts, suggesting culture is continuation of cosmic design. Death beliefs reveal further parallels. Mesopotamian texts describe an underworld, a shadowy place beneath the earth where all go, kings and commoners alike. Offerings to the dead ensure their peace. The island narrative hints at judgment by gods for moral decay, implying consequences beyond life. Moral order extends past death, reinforcing ethical norms. Festivals punctuate the year, reenacting foundational myths. The Akitu festival in Mesopotamia marks the new year, involving procession of divine statues and reaffirmation of royal authority. Public ritual binds community, reminding participants of shared story. Music, dance, and feasting accompany solemn acts, blending joy with reverence. Such events renew social cohesion. Sacred time differs from ordinary time. Ritual calendars align with celestial cycles. The appearance of certain stars signals planting or harvest. Astronomy and theology converge. When a priest watches the sky, he is both scientist and devotee. The heavens become text, stars like script across night. Iconography communicates theology visually. Winged figures, horned crowns, and composite creatures appear on reliefs and seals. Each symbol carries layered meaning. A horned crown indicates divinity. Wings suggest transcendence. Art educates as well as decorates. Even those who cannot read absorb doctrine through imagery. The moral dimension of religion shapes narrative of decline. The island's fall follows loss of virtue, greed replacing balance. Mesopotamian flood myths often stem from human excess or divine irritation. Such stories teach limits. They warn that prosperity can breed arrogance and that cosmic order demands respect. Yet religion also offers hope. Survival of a flood hero or restoration after catastrophe implies continuity. The world can be remade. Sacrifice, prayer, and right action can restore favor. This cyclical resilience comforts communities facing real instability. Priests hold specialized knowledge. They memorize hymns, maintain calendars, interpret omens. Their authority rests on literacy and ritual expertise. Temples house libraries, archives of clay tablets. Knowledge becomes sacred capital. Losing a temple means losing memory. In both settings, the divine saturates material culture. Amulets ward off harm, blessings accompany construction, oaths invoke gods as witnesses. There is no purely secular sphere. Every action potentially touches unseen forces. Understanding this integration prevents misreading ancient accounts as mere superstition. Religion here is a system for organizing reality, linking environment, politics, and morality. It encodes ecological awareness, social contracts, and existential questions. The island's sacred pillar and the river city's temple archives serve similar roles, anchoring lore and knowledge in a transcendent frame. When later ages look back and speak of lost golden eras, they often mean times when divine and human seemed closer, when rituals felt effective, when order appeared stable. Memory of such intimacy persists even as belief systems evolve. It lingers in architecture, in language, in the quiet assumption that behind visible structures lies an invisible design. The sacred city, whether ringed by sea or rising from mud, becomes a map of that design, a place where heaven and earth once touched more directly than they seem to now. Memory of a place does not fade evenly. Edges blur first, the exact curve of a shoreline, the number of steps in a stair, while the emotional core hardens. What remains is not a blueprint, but an atmosphere, a sense of height, of brilliance, of order that once felt natural. Over generations, such memory detaches from geography and attaches to identity. A people begins to say not just that a great city existed, but that they come from it, even if their feet have never touched its ground. Displacement is a powerful engine of story. When communities move because land fails, flooded, salinized, stripped of resources, they carry loss like a portable homeland. Archaeology shows repeated migrations in ancient Near Eastern history. Shifts in river courses, droughts, or political upheaval push groups to new regions. Pottery styles change, burial customs mix, languages borrow words. Each migration leaves traces in material culture, like fingerprints of contact. In such movement, older centers gain mythic glow. A ruined or abandoned city becomes a symbol of a purer time. Even if the reality included hardship, distance polishes memory. The island capital, described with shining metals and perfect rings, may function as such a symbolic origin, a compressed image of cultural beginnings projected onto a single, magnificent site. Mesopotamian texts show similar retrospective longing. Later hymns praise ancient cities as seats of primordial order. Eridu, remembered as first city of kingship, is celebrated long after its political importance wanes. Its marshland setting, once practical for fishing and reeds, becomes sacred landscape. Origin stories attach to specific sites, making geography a vessel for time. Language preserves echoes of movement. Loan words enter as cultures meet. Seafaring terms, agricultural tools, religious titles, shared vocabulary hints at shared histories. Trade colonies spread ideas along with goods. A merchant who settles abroad carries stories of home. Children raised in new lands inherit tales of a distant origin, blending them with local experience. Maps in the mind can outlast physical maps. A community might no longer know precise directions to an ancestral place, but it knows that such a place lies beyond a boundary, across a sea, past mountains, beyond pillars. These liminal markers, like the strait once called the edge of the world, function as thresholds between known and remembered realms. Narratives of decline often accompany migration. The lost homeland is framed as more just, more virtuous. Present struggles contrast with past abundance. Such framing reinforces group cohesion. Shared nostalgia becomes social glue. It also serves as critique of current leaders, holding up an idealized past as standard. Material evidence sometimes aligns with these memories. Archaeologists find cultural layers showing abrupt abandonment, burned strata, or flood deposits. A tell may show occupation for centuries, then sudden gap. Later settlers build nearby, perhaps aware of older ruins. Stories explaining why the old city fell circulate, mixing fact and moral interpretation. Seafaring cultures particularly cultivate distant origin myths. The horizon invites speculation. Islands appear and vanish with fog. A sunken reef can be imagined as drowned land. Navigators use stars, winds, and currents as guides, embedding environmental knowledge in narrative. A story about a city swallowed by sea might encode warnings about reefs or shoals disguised as mythic history. Psychologically, origin myths provide stability. They anchor identity beyond immediate circumstance. If one's people descend from a noble, divinely connected society, present hardship becomes temporary deviation, not defining condition. This perspective sustains endurance. Transmission across time reshapes geography. A tale born in one region may be retold in another, with landmarks adapted. A mountain becomes a hill, a river, a sea. Core motifs remain: advanced ancestors, moral fall, catastrophic loss. Variants emerge, but structure persists. In both island and river traditions, the lost age stands at a threshold before a great divide. After the flood or sinking, time feels smaller, human lifespans shorter, contact with gods diminished. This sense of contraction reflects awareness of change, perhaps technological regression after collapse, perhaps simply human tendency to idealize beginnings. Modern migrations echo ancient patterns. Rising seas today threaten coasts, forcing relocations. Communities speak of vanishing homelands, of traditions tied to specific landscapes now altered. Listening to ancient narratives with this in mind reveals continuity of experience. Environmental change, movement, and memory remain intertwined. The persistence of a detailed urban image, a city of rings, canals, metals, suggests that memory held onto an architectural core. Even if geography shifted, the pattern of ordered space endured in imagination. Such mental blueprints can influence later design. Circular cities, sacred enclosures, axial layouts may echo older models filtered through story. Ultimately, the power of a lost homeland myth lies not in literal coordinates, but in its role as compass. It points a people toward values they associate with origin: justice, balance, connection to the divine. Whether or not the physical city can be found beneath water or sand, the narrative city shapes behavior and aspiration. It stands as both memory and goal, a place that once was and, in moral terms, might be again if the lessons of loss are heeded. Beneath the surface of the sea, landscapes persist in silence. River valleys continue under waves, hills become ridges of rock, and former shorelines lie buried under layers of sediment. Only in recent decades has technology allowed systematic exploration of these drowned worlds. Sonar, which uses sound waves to map surfaces, sends pulses downward and reads the echoes, building images of the seafloor. What once required imagination now appears as contours on a screen. Channels winding through silt, terraces that look suspiciously like former coastlines. Submerged archaeology is difficult. Salt corrodes metal, currents scatter lighter materials, and visibility can be low. Yet discoveries accumulate. Off various coasts, stone tools, hearth remains, and structural alignments have been found underwater, proving that human occupation extended into areas now claimed by the sea. These finds do not match any single legend, but they confirm a crucial fact. Entire chapters of human settlement lie beyond today's shoreline. When sea level rose after the last ice age, continental shelves, shallow margins extending from land, were flooded. These areas often provided rich resources: fish, shellfish, fertile soil, freshwater springs. Early communities likely favored them. As waters advanced, people retreated inland. Some sites would have been abandoned gradually, others abruptly after storms or surges. Geological records show periods of instability. Meltwater pulses could raise sea levels quickly. Earthquakes might trigger submarine landslides, displacing water and generating tsunamis. In enclosed seas such as the Mediterranean, Waves can reflect off coasts, compounding damage. Oral traditions of cities lost in a day may encode such events. The island narrative situates its vanished land beyond a narrow strait, in an ocean larger than the inland sea. This framing aligns with the idea that knowledge of outer waters existed, even if limited. Sailors who ventured past familiar coasts would have encountered different currents and swells, reinforcing the sense of entering another realm. A large island or archipelago there could become a focal point for trade or myth. Geologists reconstruct ancient shorelines using bathymetric data and sediment cores. Mapping reveals paleorivers, ancient riverbeds extending across seabeds. These indicate where freshwater once flowed. Settlements near such rivers would have faced progressive inundation. Underwater terraces mark former coastal plains. Some researchers hypothesize that complex sites may lie buried under meters of sediment, preserved but inaccessible without advanced techniques. Submerged cultural heritage raises philosophical questions. If a civilization's physical remains lie underwater, inaccessible or eroded, how should its memory be valued? Myths may serve as its only surviving monuments. A story could be the last standing structure of a drowned world. Comparisons with known events sharpen perspective. The eruption of Thera, now Santorini, in the Aegean during the Bronze Age caused tsunamis and ash fallout that affected nearby civilizations. Archaeology at Akrotiri shows a prosperous town buried in volcanic material, preserving frescoes and buildings. Though later than the time often associated with earlier flood traditions, it demonstrates how sudden natural disasters can erase vibrant communities, leaving only traces and stories. Black Sea research has explored the idea that rising Mediterranean waters once breached a land barrier, rapidly flooding lower basins. While debate continues over timing and scale, the concept illustrates how dramatic hydrological change can reshape regions within humanly perceptible spans. Myths do not record coordinates, but they do preserve patterns. Land beyond known boundaries, advanced societies, sudden watery end. These elements might reflect composite memories of multiple events over millennia. A coastal flood here, a volcanic collapse there, layered into a single narrative of ultimate loss. Technological advances may one day uncover more. Sub-bottom profiling, which penetrates sediment layers with sound, can detect buried structures. Autonomous underwater vehicles can scan wide areas. Each discovery will not confirm legend wholesale, but will add pieces to the mosaic of human antiquity. The emotional weight of submerged heritage endures even without excavation. Standing on a beach, one looks out and imagines what lies below. Fishermen haul up artifacts in nets, fragments of amphorae or worked stone, tangible reminders of vanished shores. Such moments collapse time, connecting present to deep past. Science approaches these questions with caution, avoiding leaps from possibility to certainty. Yet it acknowledges that much of early human history is literally underwater. Recognizing this gap tempers dismissal of ancient accounts as pure fantasy. It invites humility about what remains unknown. The sea both preserves and destroys. Anaerobic conditions in some sediments can protect organic materials. In other settings, waves grind structures to rubble. Chance governs survival. A story repeated may outlast stone. Listening to ancient narratives with awareness of submerged landscapes reframes them. They become not just moral tales, but potential echoes of lived experience in places now beyond reach. Whether or not any specific island city can be identified, the broader truth remains. Human history includes chapters written on coasts now erased. The boundary between mythic memory and geological process narrows when viewed through this lens. The ocean's surface hides not emptiness but archives, waiting in darkness, while above, words carry their own kind of evidence across generations. Human beings have always watched the sky with the same intensity they give to the sea. Above is pattern, rhythm, and recurrence. Stars rise and set in predictable arcs. Planets wander against fixed constellations. The sun's path shifts north and south through the year. Long before telescopes, careful observers turned the heavens into a calendar and a map. Astronomy, the study of celestial bodies, begins as survival knowledge: when to plant, when floods might come, when seasonal winds will change. In Mesopotamia, priests climbed temple platforms to scan the horizon. They recorded star positions on clay tablets, noting appearances and disappearances. The heliacal rising of a star, its first visible emergence just before sunrise after a period of invisibility, could mark a season's turning. Patterns in the sky became omens. If a planet glowed red, perhaps war loomed. If an eclipse darkened the sun, kings might fear divine displeasure. The sky was not distant background but active text. Geometry links heaven and earth. When a city aligns its main axis with cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, it embeds cosmic order into daily life. A temple facing sunrise at equinox, when day and night are equal, connects ritual to celestial balance. Such alignments appear across ancient cultures. Measuring angles and distances requires tools and mathematical concepts. A right angle, the 90-degree corner, familiar from buildings, can be created using a 3-4-5 triangle, known empirically long before formal proof. The island capital's concentric design suggests geometric awareness. Circles share a center, symbolizing unity around a core. Water and land alternating in rings evoke ripples, a natural pattern turned architectural. Geometry here is not decoration, but worldview, expressing harmony between design and nature. Calendars synchronize communities. A shared schedule for festivals, planting, and trade reduces uncertainty. Lunar months, based on the moon's cycle of phases, do not match the solar year perfectly, so intercalation, adding extra days or months, keeps seasons aligned. Such adjustments require observation and record, reinforcing the role of specialists. Timekeeping shapes narrative of past and future. If cycles repeat, decline and renewal feel inevitable. A golden age may be followed by a dark age, then resurgence. Myths of ages, gold, silver, bronze, iron, encode this sense of descent from perfection. The island's story of moral decline mirrors such schema. Mesopotamian flood-dividing eras also fit cyclical perception. Navigation depends on celestial cues. Seafarers use stars to determine direction at night. The position of Polaris, the North Star, indicates latitude in the northern hemisphere. Even without precise instruments, experienced navigators sense latitude from star height. Knowledge of prevailing winds and currents complements sky reading. A culture with wide trade networks likely cultivated such expertise. Myth and astronomy intertwine. Constellations carry stories, heroes, animals, gods, projected onto star patterns. These narratives aid memory, turning abstract points of light into recognizable figures. When a myth references a specific star's rising or setting, it encodes seasonal knowledge in narrative form. Astronomical events can leave deep impressions. Comets, bright wanderers with tails, appear unpredictably. Meteor showers streak across sky like falling fire. Eclipses temporarily erase sun or moon. Without modern explanation, such phenomena evoke awe or fear, woven into mythic interpretation. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over roughly 26,000 years, gradually shifts star positions relative to seasons. Though ancient observers did not understand the mechanism, they might notice long-term changes. A star once rising at equinox no longer does so centuries later. Such drift could feed narratives of lost alignment between heaven and earth. Mathematics grows alongside astronomy. Counting days, predicting cycles, and dividing circles into degrees fosters numerical sophistication. The base 60 system used in Mesopotamia proves useful for fractions. 60 divides by many numbers, simplifying calculations. This system survives in minutes and seconds today, a legacy of ancient sky watchers. Sacred architecture often incorporates astronomical sightlines, a narrow window framing sunrise on a specific day, a corridor aligned with solstice sunset. These features create dramatic effects, reinforcing connection between ritual and cosmos. Participants experience celestial events as part of built space, blurring boundary between natural and constructed. In the island account, divine ancestry ties rulers to cosmic order. Their law rituals under temple roofs metaphorically align human justice with heavenly law. Mesopotamian kings claim favor of sky gods, asserting their rule reflects cosmic will. Governance mirrors celestial hierarchy. Sky observation also humbles. Vastness and regularity of celestial motions contrast with human fragility. Floods and quakes may seem chaotic, but stars keep course. This duality, earth unstable, sky constant, shapes existential outlook. Stability is sought in aligning with what endures. Stories of lost ages sometimes link to celestial cycles. A catastrophic flood might be timed with an eclipse or unusual planetary conjunction, remembered as sign of cosmic shift. While modern science separates coincidence from causation, ancient minds saw pattern. Looking upward, early civilizations saw not emptiness but order and message. They translated that order into calendars, laws, and myths. The island's geometric city and the river priest's star tablets represent parallel attempts to root human life in larger structure. Even when cities fall and records break, the sky remains, inviting each generation to read its patterns anew, to measure time, and to wonder how closely their own age aligns with the grand design they perceive above. Every civilization builds not only with stone and metal, but with memory of danger. Fear becomes architecture, encoded in walls, watchtowers, and strategic placement. The island capital, wrapped in rings of water and stone, reveals a society that expects threat. Defense is not an afterthought, it is foundational. Concentric moats slow attackers, bridges can be controlled, narrow passages force movement into predictable lines. Military design here is geometry serving survival. In Mesopotamia, city walls rise from flat plains where horizons offer little natural protection. Mud brick ramparts, sometimes faced with baked brick, encircle settlements. Gates become choke points, reinforced with towers. Archaeological remains show multiple wall phases, each thicker than the last, as if memory of siege accumulated layer by layer. Defensive architecture is history made solid. Armies reflect economic base. A chariot requires wood, leather, metal, trained animals, and skilled drivers. Maintaining a corps of charioteers implies surplus wealth. Infantry, armed with spears, shields, and bows, draw from farming populations. The island's detailed military quotas, parcel by parcel, show systematic mobilization. Land is not only source of food, but of soldiers. Weapons technology shapes tactics. Bronze swords and spearheads cut better than stone. Composite bows made by layering materials like wood, horn, and sinew store more energy than simple bows, sending arrows farther. Training matters. A disciplined formation can overcome larger but disorganized forces. Early depictions on Mesopotamian reliefs show soldiers in ranks, shields overlapping, an image of coordination. Naval warfare adds complexity. Ships must be built strong enough to survive open water. Oarsmen require endurance and synchronization. A fleet represents floating infrastructure. Control of sea lanes protects trade and projects power. The island civilization's emphasis on canals and harbors implies maritime strength, perhaps central to its influence. Conflict leaves marks in texts as well as ruins. Inscriptions boast of victories, tribute, and captured cities. Kings present themselves as defenders of order against chaos, framing war as moral duty. Enemies become embodiments of disorder, legitimizing conquest. Yet the same texts sometimes record devastation, burned fields, deported populations. War reshapes demography. Psychological impact of conflict informs myth. Stories of heroic resistance or catastrophic defeat enter collective memory. A lost city may be remembered not only as drowned but as fallen to arrogance or divine wrath triggered by violence. Moral framing helps process trauma. Fortifications also express power internally. Walls separate elite from common districts, sacred from profane. Control of movement reinforces hierarchy. Gates can close against not only invaders but unrest. Defense architecture doubles as social control. Resource competition drives conflict. Fertile land, water access, trade routes, these are strategic assets. Mesopotamian cities often fought over canal control, as irrigation determined harvest success. A blocked canal could starve a rival. Thus, hydraulic engineering and warfare intertwine. Technological diffusion spreads military ideas. A new weapon or tactic adopted by one group prompts response from others. Arms races are not modern phenomena. Archaeological layers showing sudden appearance of different weapon styles hint at such exchanges. Yet defense has limits. Overextension strains systems, maintaining large forces drains resources. If harvests fail or trade falters, armies shrink. Walls crumble without upkeep. Invincibility narratives can breed complacency, leaving societies vulnerable when circumstances change. Collapse sometimes follows a cascade. Environmental stress reduces food, leading to unrest. Unrest weakens defense. External enemies exploit weakness. In mythic retelling, these processes compress into singular divine judgment or fate. The island's sudden destruction may overlay longer decline. After collapse, ruins serve as cautionary monuments. Later settlers may reuse stones, but stories linger. A fallen wall tells of past might and present fragility. Children grow up hearing of the great city that stood there, shaping identity around loss and resilience. Peaceful periods, too, shape defense thinking. Long stretches without war can lead to reduced vigilance. Investment shifts to luxury or monumental display rather than fortification. When threat returns, unprepared societies suffer. Narratives of a golden age often omit this vulnerability, highlighting prosperity while forgetting risk. Ultimately, military and defensive structures reveal worldview. They show how a society balances openness with caution, trade with security. The island's layered rings suggest confidence in design, belief that geometry and engineering can control fate. Mesopotamian walls rising from mud reflect persistence against ever-present uncertainty. War and protection are not separate from culture, they are threads woven through it. Tools, rituals, and myths all respond to danger. A people who remember floods also remember invasions. Their cities become statements. We know what can happen, and we are ready, or at least we hope we are. Prosperity leaves a different kind of trace than war. Where conflict carves scars into walls, abundance seeps into daily objects, finer pottery, decorative inlays, varied diets, spacious homes. Archaeologists read wealth in layers of refuse, in the thickness of midden deposits, in the diversity of animal bones. A city at its height does not just build monuments, it multiplies small comforts. The island capital, described as overflowing with metals, animals, and crops, evokes this saturation of resources. Mesopotamian urban centers at their peaks show similar signals. Warehouses full, craft quarters busy, temples receiving steady offerings. Agriculture underpins it all. Irrigation, the deliberate channeling of water to fields, turns uncertain rainfall into planned yield. Canals branch like veins from rivers, distributing life. But irrigation is a pact with soil. Over time, water evaporates under sun, leaving salts behind. If drainage is poor, salinity rises, reducing fertility. Ancient texts from the river plains record shifts in crops, barley replacing wheat because it tolerates salt better. Prosperity contains seeds of decline. Urban diets expand with trade. Fish from rivers or seas, dates from palms, grains, legumes, and livestock products combine. Variety improves nutrition but depends on networks. If roots break, diversity shrinks. The island's herds of elephants and rich forests suggest ecological zones integrated into economy. Mesopotamia, lacking timber, relies on imports. Dependence can be strength or vulnerability. Craft production flourishes in stable times. Potters experiment with glazes, metal workers with alloys, weavers with patterns. Artistic expression grows from security. Luxury items, jewelry, carved ivories, ornate vessels signal both skill and surplus labor. Burial goods reflect social stratification. Elite graves contain precious items, while common burials remain simple. Inequality sharpens. With wealth comes complexity in governance. Taxation, tribute, and redistribution systems expand. Record-keeping increases. Scribes become indispensable. Bureaucracy grows, sometimes becoming burden. Tablets list rations for workers, payments to soldiers, offerings to temples. Administration both enables and constrains. Urban space diversifies, markets cluster, residential districts vary in size and amenities. Sanitation systems may develop, drains carrying waste away. Public works, roads, docks, storage facilities improve efficiency. A thriving city hums with layered activity, yet prosperity can obscure fragility. Success breeds confidence, sometimes excess. Monumental building may outpace maintenance. Elite consumption may draw resources from infrastructure. Social tensions can rise as disparities widen. Texts from various ancient societies warn against hubris, the overconfidence that precedes fall. Environmental feedback loops intensify under pressure. Deforestation for fuel or construction reduces soil stability, increasing erosion. Sediment clogs canals, requiring more labor to clear. If labor supply falters through disease, migration, or unrest, systems degrade. Prosperity's machinery depends on constant input. Disease spreads more easily in dense populations. Close quarters and trade connections facilitate transmission. While ancient records rarely describe epidemics in modern terms, sudden population declines in archaeological layers hint at such events. Health is another hidden pillar of prosperity. Climate variability adds unpredictability. Drought cycles can last years. Tree ring studies in some regions show patterns of moisture fluctuation. A string of poor harvests strains storage and social order. Famine erodes trust in leadership and gods alike. In narratives of decline, moral explanations dominate. The island civilization's loss of virtue mirrors patterns seen elsewhere. Wealth leading to corruption. Mesopotamian myths link human noise or disobedience to divine punishment. Such stories externalize systemic stress into moral causality. Trade, once lifeline, can spread shock. If a distant partner collapses, supply chains break. Luxury crafts reliant on imported materials suffer first. Economic contraction ripples inward. Despite these risks, periods of prosperity leave enduring legacies. Artistic styles, legal traditions, and technological innovations persist beyond collapse. Later societies mine earlier achievements, copying scripts, reviving motifs, rebuilding on old foundations. Memory of abundance shapes aspiration. Archaeological layers showing sudden abandonment contrast with rich, preceding strata, emphasizing abruptness of change. A bustling quarter becomes rubble in one phase. To those who lived through it, the transition must have felt unreal, as if the ground of certainty dissolved. Prosperity is thus both apex and precipice. It represents culmination of knowledge and cooperation, but also height from which fall is steepest. Ancient accounts of shining cities and abundant lands capture this duality. They celebrate achievement while warning of impermanence. In the end, traces of wealth, fine pottery shards, metal fragments, ornate carvings, speak softly from soil. They testify that people once lived well there, ate varied meals, crafted beauty. Their absence now underscores the central lesson carried through myth and ruin alike. Flourishing is real, but not permanent. The challenge is not only to rise, but to sustain balance between growth and restraint, between use and renewal. When that balance falters, prosperity becomes memory, and memory becomes story. When a civilization disappears, what lingers first is not certainty but argument. Ruins invite interpretation the way blank pages invite ink. Later generations look at broken walls, eroded mounds, fragments of script, and try to rebuild an entire world from clues that survived by accident. Interpretation becomes a second layer of history, one built by those who come after, projecting their own concerns backward onto silent stones. Ancient people did this as much as modern scholars. Mesopotamian kings restored temples already ancient in their time, claiming continuity with founders they knew only from damaged inscriptions. They copied old texts, sometimes misunderstanding archaic language, smoothing it into forms they could grasp. Their reconstructions mixed preservation with invention. A temple rebuilt in a later style still claimed to be the same sacred house, its identity anchored more in story than in brick. The island narrative itself is an interpretation layered over older memory. A philosopher frames the account as inherited wisdom, transmitted through priests and lawmakers. The telling occurs in a context of political reflection, using the ancient city as mirror for contemporary society. The past becomes a tool to think with, not just a record to consult. This does not erase possible historical core, but it shows how memory serves present needs. Modern archaeology continues this pattern, though with different methods. Excavation is controlled destruction, removing layers to expose earlier ones. Each trench is a choice about what to reveal and what to leave buried. Artifacts do not speak on their own. They require context, comparison, theory. Interpretive frameworks, diffusion, independent invention, environmental determinism guide conclusions. Debates persist because evidence rarely compels a single answer. One fragment of wall might suggest defensive architecture, another ceremonial space. Without written explanation, function must be inferred from form and parallels. Even writing, when present, demands translation across languages and conceptual worlds. Words like king, god, or city carry different meanings in different eras. Projecting modern definitions backward risks distortion. The desire to find lost civilizations often leads to overreach. A submerged structure may be declared a palace without proof. A natural formation may be mistaken for human work. Skepticism is a safeguard, but it can also harden into dismissal of possibilities. Balance requires openness tempered by method. Ancient interpreters also wrestled with ruins. Greek travelers to Egypt marveled at pyramids, speculating on their purpose. Roman writers described older monuments with a mix of admiration and conjecture. Each era layered its own narrative over the material past. This process does not end, it evolves. Myth can preserve kernels of observation while reshaping meaning. A tale of a city swallowed by sea might begin with a specific event, then expand into moral allegory. Later listeners treat it as warning, not chronicle. Still later, others search for geographic correlate. Each stage adds meaning without necessarily erasing earlier ones. Scholars analyze narrative structure as well as content. Patterns of rise and fall, divine favor and punishment mirror broader human storytelling tendencies. Recognizing these patterns does not negate possible historical reference, but it cautions against literalism. Stories can be true in multiple senses at once: historical, moral, symbolic. Material culture sometimes unsettles interpretation. Unexpected finds, advanced tools in early layers, foreign goods far from origin, force revision of timelines. History is not fixed. It is model continually updated as evidence grows. The past resists final closure. Public imagination often moves faster than scholarship. Popular books, films, and online communities weave grand narratives from limited data. While sometimes speculative, such engagement reflects enduring fascination with origins and loss. It can inspire interest that eventually supports careful research, though it can also spread misconceptions. The tension between evidence and imagination echoes ancient dynamics. Scribes copying king lists may have faced gaps they filled with symbolic numbers. Priests recounting floods may have blended different events into one story. Human minds seek coherence. Where information is incomplete, narrative steps in. Accepting uncertainty is difficult. Definitive answers comfort, ambiguity unsettles. Yet in studying deep past, ambiguity is honest. It acknowledges limits of surviving data. It leaves room for new discoveries to reshape understanding. The island and river traditions, when viewed through this lens, are not puzzles to be solved once and for all, but ongoing conversations between past and present. Each generation listens, interprets, and retells, adding its own layer. Meaning accumulates like sediment, forming a mound of memory whose core may never be fully exposed. Still, pursuit continues because questions themselves have value. Asking whether a story reflects real events prompts investigation of geology, archaeology, and linguistics. Even when direct correlation remains elusive, the search expands knowledge. The act of interpreting ruins and texts becomes a form of dialogue with those who came before. In that dialogue, humility is key. Stones do not lie, but they do not explain. Texts endure, but they carry voices shaped by their own time. Bridging these gaps requires patience, method, and willingness to revise. The reward is not certainty, but a richer sense of human continuity, an awareness that we, too, are interpreters leaving traces for others to puzzle over long after our own structures fall. Silence is rarely empty. It is filled with what has not yet been understood. Between the known fragments of early civilizations lies a wide field of absence, lost sites, decayed materials, unwritten lives. This absence tempts imagination, but it also demands discipline. The challenge is to listen to what remains without forcing it to say more than it can. In the study of deep antiquity, preservation is uneven. Stone survives better than wood, clay better than cloth. Coastal settlements, once hubs of activity, now lie underwater or have been eroded away. Nomadic groups leave lighter traces than urban dwellers. The archaeological record is therefore biased, weighted toward what endures physically. Recognizing this bias is essential when interpreting narratives of vanished complexity. The island account describes monumental architecture, engineered waterways, and rich material culture. If such a society existed on land now submerged or eroded, its physical traces might be sparse or deeply buried. The absence of obvious ruins does not automatically negate possibility, but it requires careful weighing of likelihood and evidence. Extraordinary claims require proportionate support. Similarly, Mesopotamian texts describe eras before writing, when kings ruled for vast spans. These cannot be verified directly, yet they reveal how later societies conceptualized their origins. The stories tell us more about cultural self-understanding than about precise chronology. Both perspectives, material and narrative, offer pieces of a larger puzzle. Modern science provides tools to probe silence. Remote sensing detects buried features without excavation. Ground-penetrating radar sends electromagnetic pulses into soil, reflecting off buried structures. Satellite imagery reveals patterns invisible at ground level, crop marks, soil discoloration, hinting at hidden walls or roads. Underwater mapping charts submerged landscapes. Each method expands the range of detectable past. Yet data without context can mislead. Natural formations may mimic human design. A symmetrical rock outcrop might be mistaken for a foundation. Confirmation requires multiple lines of evidence: stratigraphy, artifacts, dating methods. Radiocarbon dating measures decay of carbon isotopes in organic remains. Thermoluminescence dates last heating of ceramics. Cross-checking builds confidence. Interdisciplinary work bridges gaps. Geologists reconstruct ancient environments. Linguists trace word origins. Geneticists map human migrations. Together, these fields sketch broader patterns. For instance, DNA studies reveal population movements that align with archaeological transitions. Language families spread in ways suggesting contact and exchange. Such patterns contextualize narratives of origin and displacement. Myth, when treated cautiously, contributes insight. It encodes perception of landscape, values, and collective memory. A tale of concentric waterways might reflect a real experience of engineered water control, amplified into grandeur. A story of divine descent could mirror social hierarchies, justified through sacred lineage. Decoding symbolism requires familiarity with cultural context. Time depth complicates matters. Over millennia, coastlines shift, rivers change course, climates oscillate. A site habitable in one era may be desert or seabed in another. Maps of the past look different from those of today. Reconstructing these shifts involves modeling and sediment analysis. Even then, resolution is coarse. Public fascination with lost worlds persists because it addresses enduring questions. Where did we come from, and what have we forgotten? The allure of hidden knowledge reflects desire to reconnect with perceived origins. Responsible scholarship neither dismisses curiosity nor indulges unfounded certainty. It navigates between openness and rigor. Ethics enter the picture. Excavation disturbs remains. Underwater exploration risks damage to fragile sites. Preservation often conflicts with desire to uncover. Decisions about what to dig and what to leave involve value judgments about heritage. Narratives of lost civilizations can influence these priorities. Uncertainty is not failure but condition of deep history. Accepting partial knowledge allows space for revision. Discoveries sometimes overturn assumptions, reminding us that absence of evidence today may become evidence tomorrow. Patience aligns with the slow pace of geological and archaeological revelation. In the interplay between silence and story, humility keeps interpretation grounded. The island and river traditions stand as voices from the past, carrying both memory and metaphor. Science listens for echoes in material record, aware that not all stories leave footprints we can trace. What remains most certain is human continuity. Whether cities rise on rings of water or on river mud, whether laws are carved in metal or pressed in clay, people build, organize, believe, and remember. They face forces larger than themselves, water, time, decay, and seek meaning in response. The silence between their traces invites us to look carefully, to question boldly but responsibly, and to recognize that mystery is part of inheritance. In that recognition lies balance. We stand between what is known and what may never be known, guided by fragments and disciplined imagination. The past is neither blank nor fully written. It is a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped and rewritten, where older words show faintly beneath newer ones. Reading it demands patience, care, and willingness to let some lines remain blurred, trusting that even incomplete understanding enriches our sense of being part of a story far older and wider than any single narrative can contain. Time does not move like a straight road in the human mind. It coils, loops, returns in echoes. When people look back toward origins, they rarely see a distant, alien past. They see a mirror, sometimes clearer than the present. The age before the waters, the city of shining walls, the reigns that stretched beyond counting. These are not only accounts of what once was, they are commentaries on what is. In both traditions, the earliest age is marked by closeness between human and divine. Kings descend from gods or receive rule directly from heaven. Law is sacred, not negotiated. Nature seems cooperative, land fertile, resources abundant. This framing does more than glorify beginnings. It defines a standard. If the present falls short, it is because something essential has been lost: virtue, balance, alignment with cosmic order. Such thinking shapes ethics. When decline is attributed to moral decay, behavior becomes central. Greed, arrogance, and injustice threaten not only society but the fabric of the world. Stories of collapse teach restraint. They say, prosperity without humility invites ruin. In this sense, myth functions as social regulation, embedding caution in narrative form. Memory of a golden age also inspires restoration. Temples rebuilt on ancient foundations are not mere replicas. They are attempts to reconnect with perceived purity of origin. Legal reforms may invoke ancestral laws. Cultural revival movements draw on mythic pasts to legitimize change. The past becomes resource. Yet there is tension in this orientation. Idealizing origins can obscure present creativity. If perfection lies only behind, innovation may seem suspect. Ancient societies balanced reverence for tradition with practical adaptation. They copied old texts, but also updated them. They honored gods of ancestors while integrating new deities through conquest or trade. Modern audiences encounter these narratives differently. Scientific frameworks emphasize gradual evolution of complexity. Yet the emotional power of sudden origin stories persists. The idea that civilization arrived fully formed resonates with intuition that human capacities can surge under the right conditions. Rapid cultural change in recent history, industrialization, digital revolution, shows that leaps are possible, even if built on prior foundations. Environmental awareness adds new layers. Ancient flood stories gain urgency in an era of rising seas and climate instability. The sense that human action can disturb balance aligns with modern ecological insight. Moral and material interpretations converge. Excess has consequences. Identity remains central. Groups define themselves through stories of where they began. Whether tied to a river city, a sacred mountain, or a drowned island, origin narratives anchor belonging. They offer continuity across upheaval. Even diaspora communities maintain connection through shared memory of homeland. The island and river traditions differ in imagery but share structure. Divine or semi-divine founders, ordered society, moral decline, catastrophic reset, diminished later age. This pattern appears globally, suggesting deep psychological roots. It may reflect universal human experience of childhood innocence, adulthood complexity, and aging awareness of loss projected onto collective history. Storytelling itself ensures survival of these patterns. Each retelling adjusts emphasis, highlights new relevance. A philosopher may use the ancient city to critique his own society. A priest may use flood myth to reinforce ritual obedience. A modern listener may hear ecological warning or philosophical reflection. In this ongoing reinterpretation, certainty about literal events becomes less central than recognition of enduring themes. The narratives endure because they speak to fundamental conditions: vulnerability, aspiration, memory, and hope. They remind that human achievement can be extraordinary and fragile. Hope persists even in declined stories. Survival after flood, rebuilding after ruin, memory of order, these suggest continuity. Even if Golden Age cannot be fully restored, fragments can be recovered. Law, art, and knowledge survive in altered form. The tension between loss and continuity drives cultural evolution. Each generation stands between inheritance and innovation, drawing from past while facing new challenges. Myths of origin and fall frame this process, offering perspective on cycles larger than individual lives. Looking back toward the drowned city or the first river kingdom is thus not escapism but orientation. It situates present within a long arc. It asks, What did they value? What led to their fall, and what can be learned? These questions remain relevant regardless of historical verification. Ultimately, the power of these ancient visions lies in their capacity to hold contradiction. They celebrate human potential while warning of limits. They acknowledge fragility while affirming endurance of memory. In listening to them, we engage in the same act as those who first told them, weaving experience into meaning, seeking pattern in change, and placing our brief moment within a story that stretches back to imagined beginnings and forward into unknown futures. Night over open water erases borders. The horizon disappears, sky and sea, merging into a single dark field scattered with stars. In that vastness, human constructions, cities, empires, monuments, feel small, temporary. Yet the same night, sky that humbles also connects. The stars, seen above a river delta, are the same that shine above a distant strait. Across time and geography, people have lifted their eyes to the same patterns and wondered where they stand in the order of things. The memory of a radiant island ringed by water and law, and the memory of the first city where rule descended from heaven, are not merely tales of lost places. They are attempts to answer that question of place. They say, once order and meaning were closer, more visible. Once human life aligned more fully with the structure of the world. Something changed, but the memory of alignment remains. Standing at the edge of the sea, it is easy to imagine land beyond sight. The mind fills the unseen with possibility. Ancient sailors did this out of necessity, navigating by inference and trust in patterns. Their stories of distant lands were maps of hope and warning combined. A shining capital beyond the pillars of the known world could represent both promise and peril, a reminder that greatness exists and that it can vanish. Between the rivers, where mud built cities and floods erased them, people also lived with uncertainty. Each year the waters rose, sometimes gently, sometimes with destructive force. Survival depended on reading signs, cooperating, and remembering past disasters. The idea that kingship came from heaven expresses a recognition that order feels larger than any one generation. Institutions outlast individuals, laws persist even as rulers change. Modern perspectives often separate myth from history, symbol from fact. Yet in lived experience, these categories overlap. A story can be historically rooted and symbolically rich at once. A flood may be a geological event and a moral lesson. A city may be a physical place and an ideal of justice. Listening to these ancient voices today, in an age of satellites and data, does not require abandoning critical thought. It requires recognizing that human beings have always interpreted their world through narrative as well as measurement. Science extends our reach, mapping seafloors and dating sediments, but it does not replace the need for meaning. The two approaches can coexist, each illuminating different aspects of reality. The image of a lost golden age often carries melancholy but also motivation. It challenges complacency. If decline followed excess before, perhaps restraint now matters. If balance with environment once seemed natural, perhaps it can be sought again, informed by knowledge gained since. The past becomes not a destination to return to, but a mirror reflecting potential and warning. Memory itself is a kind of inheritance. Even when material traces sink or crumble, stories endure, reshaped but persistent. They link generations in a chain of listening and telling. To hear them is to participate in that chain, to become a steward of fragments that outlived their creators. There is humility in acknowledging how much remains unknown. Beneath oceans lie landscapes we have barely explored. Beneath tells in deserts lie layers of lives whose names are lost. Yet there is also confidence in recognizing that the drive to understand is ancient. Those who first measured fields, tracked stars, and carved laws were also seekers of pattern. In the end, whether the shining island stood exactly as described or the first kings ruled as long as lists claim, the deeper continuity remains. Humans build, remember, interpret, and rebuild. We inherit both achievements and cautions. The sea that once swallowed shores now rises again in places, reminding that history's lessons are not abstract. Looking out into darkness, one can feel both fragility and belonging. The same elements, water, earth, sky, shaped ancient lives and shape ours. Their stories are not distant curiosities, but part of a shared human effort to situate ourselves within forces larger than we can control. The lost city and the first river kingdom become symbols of that effort, markers along a path of understanding that stretches beyond any single era. Silence follows not as emptiness but as space for reflection. The stars continue their courses, indifferent yet constant. Beneath them, human voices rise and fall, each adding a verse to a long song about origin, loss, and the search for balance. Listening to those verses across millennia, we recognize our own questions in theirs, and the thread of memory feels less like a fragile relic and more like a living bridge, carrying meaning across the waters of time.